I welcome everyone on our 59th episode of Trends Literature Series. I am Neeta Aneja and I'm the founder of Trends, which is a platform for art, culture, social, and literary experiences. With us today is the versatile author of Mahabharata Unraveled, which has been published by Bloomsbury India. Ami Ganatra, who's the author today, is an alumni of IIM Ahmedabad, and she's got around 14 years of experience in business strategy and consulting, has lived across 4 continents and worked across multitude of sectors. She's also incidentally a devout yoga practitioner, a certified yoga instructor, and a student of Sanskrit and Indian knowledge system. So welcome, Ami. It was indeed a delight to pick your book up, sit back and unveil the lesser known facts about Mahabharata.
Thank you so much, Neetaji. I am privileged to be on your platform. I've seen all the authors that you had. So yeah, to be in that esteemed company is quite something. Thank you for having me.
So what a delight to have you with us today. So Ami, I'll delve into my conversation straight away. You've said that a beauty of Mahabharata is the honest portrayal of human psychology. So what really fascinated, attracted, and also drove you to write this wonderful book? And why should the readers read it?
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about the journey of writing, and probably that will bring out the reason as well.
Yes.
Mahabharata has been very close to my heart, and I'm sure very close to the hearts of most Indians. Yeah, you catch any Indian and you ask him or her, they will know Ramayana Mahabharata. And especially for Mahabharata, a lot of them will also have very strong opinions. We have our favorite characters. Koi kahega, Are Arjun is better. Koi kahega, nahi, Karna was much better. Yes. Somebody will be like, Are Draupadi was amazing. Somebody like, nahi, she was always angry. Yeah. So we have, and there was a time I remember, Neetaji, when there used to be literally fights over some of these discussions and debate we used to have. So what sort of always I can say confused me, or sort of the questions I had is that where is really the truth here? One is, yes, what we take away from Mahabharata, which a lot of people say, is that everything is gray. There is no white or black. Everybody has shades of gray. Fair enough. But on one end, we are shown that Yudhishthir is like gambling away his wife. On other end, he's called Dharmaraj. Yeah. On
Yes.
one end, we see that Karna is bichara. He's such a great warrior, but he has not gotten his due. On other hand, we see him being really foul-mouthed. He's the one inciting Duryodhan to disrobe Draupadi. So I was like, are these characters so extreme? If we look at us individually, there is some consistency. Okay, there will be people who are to extremes, but those guys are psychopaths. So are we really dealing with psychopaths in Mahabharata? So that was my question. Why is it that everybody looks so extreme in this? And for that, I really needed to find out for myself. The only way to do it was to go back to the text itself and to go back to like Vyasa's Mahabharata. So I picked up Gita Press Sanskrit Hindi version. I was also studying Sanskrit at that time. So I had a dual objective to know what is in Mahabharata and also to, read it through the Sanskrit in there. And as I started reading, I had these aha moments because it was like I realized that a lot of what we think we know about Mahabharata is actually not given in Vyasa's Mahabharata that way.
So right.
The characters of Vyasa's Mahabharata are so consistent. Yeah. Of course, they have grace. Of course, not everybody is perfect, but they are not extreme psychopaths. So you can see a trend in their behavior. Be it Draupadi, be it Karn, be it Yudhishthir. And there was a reason why they were called what they were. So if we say that Draupadi is called the Putri of Agni, yeah, it is not because she was angry all the time, but it was just the strength of her character. And that comes out very well in Vyasa's Mahabharata, which I think sometimes is lost when there is, fiction written around it, or the TV series, which portrayed her more as, just the anger part of it. So that was, for me, that was such an enriching experience that last year when there was this lockdown which happened and they were playing Mahabharata Ramayana all over again, I would put up Facebook posts saying that acha aisa hai, aisa nahi hai. And that caught the eye of Praveen Tiwari of Bloomsbury. And he said there is a lot of real good content in Mahabharata which we should bring out. and
So-
that's how the book got written. Yeah, so to present the story, or rather the history, because it's called Itihas, as Vyasji wanted us to know, because Mahabharata is not just a story for us. We take life lessons from it. So if we have to take life lessons, we have to know it at least the way Vyasji wanted us to know. So that was the basic objective.
And, I must show everyone, this is the book that we're talking about. It's a beautiful cover and it is more beautiful inside, I must say. It's immensely easy to read. It's been published by Bloomsbury. You should pick it up and read to find out so much more about Mahabharata. Thank you for writing, Ami. We needed this. And so why do you think the readers should read it? Because you just mentioned, there have been serials, there's been so much of narrative around it, so much of, you can watch so much of stuff on the net and the serials, plus read the original Ved by Vyas's book by Gita Press or somewhere. So why should we? I know the reason why we should read it. Coming from you,
Yes.
I hope you can tell the readers.
I mean, I would say, frankly, if somebody can pick up Vyasji's Mahabharata and read it, nothing like it. I would still say, if somebody has the patience and the interest, definitely read the original Mahabharata. We now have some good translations as well. Vivek Debraj ka translation, and there is, of course, the Gita Press version. So, if one can, definitely. But what happens is, it is such a huge grantha, it is such a huge scripture that it's not practically possible for a lot of us to have that kind of time and mind space to read Mahabharata for what it is. Hence, it is then important to bring out stories which are the essence of which are the essence of Mahabharata. So the characters of Mahabharata, the stories of Mahabharata, which actually would help us understand why certain things happened in a certain way to them, and hence how can we sort of learn from it. And I like to give this analogy here. When people do MBA, especially in MBA, we have a lot of case studies. So one is we do theories. Now, theory by themselves don't make sense to a lot of people because it's so abstract. But when we see those principles applied in a case study, then it's easier to relate. It's easier to see what the person did right, what the person did wrong. And hence, when I am faced with such a kind of a dharma sankat, as in Mahabharata, everybody has a dharma sankat, what is the way or what are the approaches that I should think about from a dharmic sense? And when I say dharmic, I don't mean dharma as religion, because dharma does not mean religion. Dharma means dharayati iti dharma, dharanat dharma iti ahu, that which upholds, that which sustains. We talk about sustainability. Sustainability is of prime importance today. But dharma, the concept of dharma itself, is the sustenance of the society and the universe. So this book in Mahabharata Unraveled, what I've attempted to do is bring out the sattva, the essence of Mahabharata, especially the story part of it. I think there are a lot of discourses which I have not covered yet because they wo bahut bada ho jata. Mm-hmm. So I do hope that through this, what I gained about human characteristics, human psychology, why they behave the way they do, and when they do behave the way they do, what kind of consequences he or she may have to face. So I hope that comes out of the book, and hence I think if people can read the book, that would be fantastic. And of course, I'm open to feedback, even with the learning process.
Yes, I love the fact that in the beginning of the book, and I'm sure which many, many people and the readers will find it useful, is that you've given the brief on the storyline of the Mahabharata and the sequence of the events in a very, very summarized and very nice manner. Once you go through it, you really get the gist of it totally in one shot. And since Mahabharata Unraveled is your first book, so how has your personal journey been? How excited you've been about this book, and how much time did it take for you to write this book?
I mean, very frankly, Neetaji, I was not even sure this book will get published. Because when Praveenji told me that try writing a book, I was like, yeah, writing Facebook post is one thing, na? Writing a book is completely different. मतलब book तो पता नहीं लिख पाऊंगी कि नहीं. And he said, नहीं आप time लो, आप सोचो. I said, चलो ठीक है. And when things have to happen, sort of the universe conspires, as we say. So I was not working at that time. I had taken a break. I had returned from Hong Kong, and I had given myself that time to just take that break and not start working already. So then I said, chalo, time bhi hai. I'm not super excited to start work immediately. So let's give it a shot. So I took a whole month going back to my notes, reading through again to see if I had enough material. And then after a month and a half, I said, ki, haan, theek hai, I think I can, I have enough content and I can start writing. So he said, chalo, theek hai, you send a proposal and all that. I did this. And I hadn't told anybody that I'm writing because, you know, I was like, well, he's telling me, likho, but who knows, yeah, eventually they might say, ki, nahi, bakwas hai, nahi publish karenge. So anyway, so I was writing then 14, 15 hours a day. It was like a proper work day. Yeah. And so four and a half months, it took me to write the first manuscript of it and submit it. Then editing itself took another 6, 7 months to bring it out. But after the first round of editing happened and when it was like, nahi, ab pakka publish ho hi jayega, then I told some of my friends, there's a possibility the book will come out. So yeah, but I think the response has been good. People have been very encouraging, and that has given me more enthusiasm, more motivation to possibly write more on similar lines. So let's see what Krishna has in mind.
No, keep it up, and I hope you write on Ramayana as well. That'll benefit a lot of people. And I really wish you're going to do that in future. So, you know, our literature series does a lot of these inspiring conversations and meaningful talks around books and the story behind the story. So today's book, Mahabharata Unraveled, definitely is very, very important for us and our audience, because Mahabharata, as we all know, has been, you know, one big epic of brilliant content. And Mahatma Ji and Mahatma Gandhi Ji also used to say that Ramayana and Mahabharata are definitely unquestionable requirement on us. So we should all go through it. So do you agree that understanding Mahabharata is to discover the purpose of one's life and understanding yourself?
Absolutely. I think what Ramayana and Mahabharata is, and more so Mahabharata, because I think it's a lot more complex than even Ramayana, yes, so to say, it helps us develop a perspective towards life. Yeah. Sometimes when we see teleseries and the way the retellings have been done, one almost takes back a message thinking that, oh, life is not fair. Yeah, life dealt a raw hand to XYZ. You know, they were so good, but somehow things didn't work out for them. I think my biggest takeaway from both Ramayana and Mahabharata was this, that if you have the right intentions and the right kind of, your heart is in the right place, it is possible we make mistakes, yeah, because we all are driven somewhere by Kam, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mad, Matsarya. That is the human nature, the greed, anger, desire, all that will always be there. But in spite of all that, after making a mistake, how is our approach when we are in that situation where maybe injustice has been done to us? How do we react when we are in a situation where, you know, there is a chance we can help somebody close to us? How do we respond, even though, you know, that person might not have been good to us in the past? And how long can one tolerate injustice and not tolerate injustice? So the beauty of Mahabharata is that because the characters are so real, they are, you know, as we call it itihas, we don't call it mythology. So itihas, it was almost for me, how should we take life? Yeah, how? Because we see that problems come in everybody's life, every single person. Even Krishna and Ram are not left untouched. Yeah, even they face situations which are adverse to them. But just facing adverse situation, is it really good or is it bad? Yeah, we can never say good or bad unless and until we let life play out its entire course, and then what seemed like was bad was actually good, and what seemed like was good in the short term, gratifying immediate senses, turned out to be much more dreadful, possibly for the entire society. So at the end of the day, it's about what does Ramayana teach us. So as I said, perspective development. Second, karma and dharma both matter. There is no running away from from karma. What you do will eventually come back to you. And when I say what you do, I mean with what intention it is done. Not so much even the action, but with what intention it is done. Third, dharma sankat, yeah, which we call an ethical dilemma. Because man is a social animal, woman is a social animal, we play multiple roles in our lives. At different points in time, there will be possibility of or rather 100% will be a situation where different roles in life will clash with each other. The priorities will clash, which is what is dharma sankat is. Yeah. So there is no escaping dharma sankat also. That will also be there. But given that situation, given such a dilemma, from what position, from what intention, with what kind of dharmic substratum are we coming and dealing with those, will determine our outcome. And lastly, I think, which is not spoken about a lot, is, in the Shastras, there is this concept of Indriya Nigraha, controlling the senses, disciplining the senses. If one needs to succeed in life, if one needs to achieve anything in life, there is no way but disciplining your mind and your senses. Not to say that you deprive it or don't enjoy life. No. But you cannot give it a free hand. You can't react. You have to respond to situations, however bad they are. So that is the kind of disciplining we all have to learn in our own life.
So right. And I mean, what do you think is the relevance of Mahabharata in today's troubled times? And also the second part of my question, which somehow relates to it, is how to get the younger generation also interested in epics like Mahabharata and its value system. Coming from you will be really the need of the hour.
So to the first point, Neetaji, as I already said, right, Itihas or Mahabharat Ramayana, as we understand them, they are sort of case studies about what we call Purushartha. So I'll just give a definition of Itihas in Sanskrit, and I'll explain it. The definition of iti, so the word itself means thus it was or so it happened, Itihas, yeah. But the definition says Dharma Artha Kama Mokshana Upadesha Samanvitam Purva Vruttam Kathayuktam Itihasam Prachakshate. Purva Vruttam, something that had happened in the past. Kathayuktam, narrated to us in a story format. Why? Because at that time it was oral rendering that used to happen, and you want that story to reach to the masses, something that had happened in the past. So it has to be presented in a way that it's easy for them to understand. Hence Kathayuktam. But it has an uddesha. What was that hetu? What was that purpose? Dharma Artha Kama Moksha, which we talk about as Purushartha. Now, very simply understanding Purushartha is what are the goals that our life is set to achieve? Yeah, why are we born? What is the purpose of this life? So we talk about in our Hindu Dharma, we talk about the 4 purushas, of which three are the most important, which is Dharma, Artha. Artha is resources. We need resources. We need wealth. Kama is desire. It means desire for perpetuating your species. Yeah, it means desire for doing something for progress. That is also desire. And lastly, the concept of sustainability, Dharma, to ensure that the samaj, the society sustains. Yeah. So to help to give this upadesh of Dharma Artha Kama Moksha, Itihas has come to us. Now this relevance, what is the purpose of life? It never goes away. Even today, in fact, today it's even more complex because in the past it was, I guess, a little simpler. The job descriptions of men, women were very clear. Who is going to work outside, who's going to work here, yeah? Women had specific role to play, men had specific role to play. Now that's not so. And for a good reason. Technology has changed, societies have changed, our value systems have changed. So we play even more roles than what we used to. Now, at any point in time, these roles come into conflict. Yeah, one is that, and this is from an individual perspective. This kind of conflict also happens at the social level. It happens at a national level. It happens at a global level. We talk about climate sustainability. We talk about terrorism, right? How do we deal with this? We talk about non-violence, but then non-violence is, we need non-violence for a society to sustain. But when you have elements in the society which are sort of breaking the fabric of the society itself, then what do you do with them? And then can anybody go out and punish? No, then there is a certain role of the administrator, which in our scriptures is called Rajdharma. Yeah. So the kings, we don't have kings anymore, but the administrators have a certain role to fulfill. So while technology has changed, some of these dilemmas still exist because we humans are still there. The society is still there. Our connection with the society goes on. It just takes different forms. It just happens, now over internet more so. So that the technological changes have happened, but inherently we remain what we are, and hence Mahabharata remains relevant even today.
Very well explained, I must say. Yes, Ami.
To the other point about how to make it more popular or how to make it relevant for kids, I think Ramayana is easier. I would say if a kid is under 10, it's better to start introducing with Ramayana rather than Mahabharata. I think Mahabharata has certain aspects which can confuse the kid even more. But again, I have seen one of my Sanskrit students. I used to teach basic Sanskrit in Hong Kong. He's just 8 and he read the book and he liked it. So then there are students like that as well. I think books like Amar Chitra Katha have done a great job already. It's more about spreading information about these books, getting these books for our kids. Now, even YouTube, social media has been used very, very effectively. So, I would say for Ramayana, there is this YouTube channel called 21 Notes.
Okay.
Excellent. They have small snippets of stories from Ramayana and from Valmiki Ramayana. So they are referring to authentic source, and they have it in English. They also have a playlist in Hindi and very beautifully narrated from a child's perspective. So there are such initiatives that have been taken, and I hope we can take more of these. Then there is an aspect of school. Yeah, I think of course if we can add some of it in the curriculum, well and good. But I think that even that is not really the key point. The key point is it has to start from home. And बच्चों का तो ठीक है. I think even parents need to know and read this scriptures to be able to communicate to the kids. पहले तो कैसे होता था ना? Most of the stories we've heard have come from our dadis and nanis, dada dadi, nana nani. Now, आजकल that is a little more difficult with nuclear families, but then parents have to assume that role, and parents are doing all they can. Yeah, we introduce our kids to reading, writing pretty early on. Then why not through some of these characters and through these scriptures in the way the kids understand?
I'm sure a lot of people will really gain from this advice of yours. And I'm really wanting to see that YouTube video channel that you mentioned about Ramayana. That sounds very exciting. So with Mahabharata, what we know and what is actually there is quite different. So what major inconsistencies you feel you notice during your writing on this great epic? So I would like to know that. And how did you decide to maybe perhaps what to talk about and perhaps what to leave behind? That would have been very, very difficult for you.
Yeah, okay. So I'll start with the second one. That's easier to answer. Mahabharata has the key story, which I summarized in the first 16 pages, right? But beyond that, there are lots of discourses, because 13 years the Pandavas were in Vanvas. So there were different rishis who would come and there would be discussions and conversations about different topics. Yeah. Then we have Vidur Niti, we have Bhishma, so the discourse on the deathbed, you know, the Shanti Parva. I have taken snippets of it, but there is a lot more to it, which I said I'll keep it out for now. Let's focus only on the story. So my focus has been on the story largely. So that was an easy choice to make at that point, because discourses, you know, once we know the story, it could be a different book of its own if someday that has to happen. To the first question, the differences which people typically know, and so those who've read the original Mahabharata, for them it's not new, but for others I think because a lot of our information comes from the retellings and from the teleseries, a major discrepancy is in the character of Karna.
Okay, yeah.
The other one is understanding of Yudhishthira, or maybe understanding of different characters, but in terms of just the facts, if I can say that, Draupadi and Karna are the ones who've been quite twisted in a lot of these retellings. So I'll start with Karna, for example.
Yeah.
The typical idea about Karna we have is that he was this extremely good warrior. Some people even claim he was much better warrior than even Arjun was.
Arjuna. Yeah.
But because of his caste, he did not get his due. Yeah, that was the only reason why this happened. And he was a very loyal friend. So that's the other thing, that Karna was a very loyal friend to Duryodhana. And the caste, why? Because he's called Sutputra. Yeah. So let's start from the Suta, the meaning of the word Suta itself. Yeah. So, you know, we have Varna system, which were the 4 Varnas, but reality was very different. If you see our scriptures, what was the unit of society was Jati, which community you are born. Yeah. Now there were 4 Varnas, but there were not just 4 Jatis. There were many Jatis. Why? Because to start off, there might have been 4 Varnas and 4 Jatis, one on one, but later on people intermingled. And when they intermingled, new Jatis were formed. Okay. So Suta is one such jati. So basically Mahabharata itself talks about some 32 jatis, which includes the mixed jatis. Suta is one of those jatis which is a Brahman mother and a Kshatriya father. Yeah. So Brahman mother, Kshatriya father. Actually, that is why we see in a lot of places that he's also doing all rituals. He's chanting Ved part, all of that he's doing. Yeah. So in that sense, he is not really from today's perspective what we call the oppressed jatis. No, he's not. His father or his foster father, Adhirath, the word used for him is Mahayashasvi. Somebody who was very well known, very successful. Yeah. So the childhood of Karna was also spent really well. They were pretty well off as a family. In fact, the other thing, so one is just the meaning of the word Sood, which we think of it as some oppressed caste, which is not. But okay, ठीक है, नहीं था तो भी it is possible that discrimination हुआ होगा. For that, we need to see the events in his life and what was the status of other suitors. Yeah, if other suits were not treated like Karna, then it cannot be that it was a narrative of the society. So let's see who are the other suits. The person who has narrated Mahabharata to us, yeah, his name is Ugrashrava Sauti. Now I'll tell you how the rendition of Mahabharata happened. Vyas Muni. Now it's important why Vyas Muni. I mean, it's important to know who Vyas Muni was. Ved Vyasa. He was the biological grandfather of both Kauravas and Pandavas. Yeah. He was the son of Satyavati, and Satyavati, they have this whole niyog process through which Vichitravirya's wife, Ambalika and Ambika, they conceive, and Dhritarashtra and Pandu are born. And their sons are Kauravas and Pandavas. So he's the biological father. So a lot of times people say history is written by victors. And hence it always supports or it always makes the victors look hero-like. Yeah. Now here that is not the case. He is equally related to both. They are all his grandsons. So the chance of bias is anyways not there. And plus he's a rishi. So that also we have to tell it. Anyway, so Vyasji, he composes Mahabharata and narrates it to his student Vaishampaya. Then they go to this yagna, which is being conducted by Janmajay. Now, who is Janmajay? Janmajay is the son of Parikshit. Parikshit is the son of Abhimanyu, and Abhimanyu is the son of Arjun. We know that. So Janmajay is like the great grandson of Arjun. So he is having a yagna going on, and there Rishi Vedvyas and his students come. Now Janmajay wants to know that what happened in that Mahabharata war, or rather in that war in which his forefathers, his uncles and his fathers were involved. He's like, they were all men of such great righteousness. Why did this war then happen at all? And then Vedvyasji says, okay, fine, Vaishampayan will tell you the story. Okay, so Vaishampayanji, first time in public, the narration of Mahabharata happens. And in that public, in the people who are listening to Mahabharata, there's one person called Ugrashrava Sauti. Ugrashrava Sauti is a Kathavachak. Yeah, he would go around. He's also a rishi. He's a Kathavachak. He would go around narrating stories from scriptures and all of that. Narrating stories important for people to learn lessons from and stuff like that. So he then went around and he reached this place called Naimisharanya, where Rishi Shaunak had a university. He had his ashram where he used to teach students. He used to live with the students. So when Ugrashrava Sautiji came, the students were like, Rishiji, where are you coming from? So he says, I went to Janmajay's yagna and I heard Mahabharata. And they were like, oh, we want to hear the Mahabharata. So Ugrashrava Sauti narrates the Mahabharata to the students of Rishi Shaunak.
Okay.
And that is the Mahabharata that we know. Yeah. Now Sauti, the word itself comes from Suta. Sutasya apatyam, Pumana Sauti. Yeah. So he is also a Suta, but he is so well regarded. And he's a Kathavachak. He's considered a Rishi. Right? So clearly his birth or his Suta had no bearing with his work or anything. He was very well respected. There is another Suta. The other Suta is Kichak. Now Kichak, if people remember, he is this guy who violates Draupadi when they were in that 1 year of disguise. In the kingdom of King Virat, Matsya Desh, the commander of the forces is Kichak, and he's considered so powerful that when Draupadi complains to the king about Kichak, the king just ignores it. because he cannot do anything to Kichak. His entire army is with Kichak, and he's an excellent warrior. When Bhim eventually kills Kichak, Duryodhan gets this idea that it is possibly Bhim, because Kichak was so powerful and so brave that only 3 people could have killed him: Karna, Bhim, and Balram. Yeah. So now Kichak is a warrior. His brothers are warriors. Yeah, they are leading forces. And Kichak's sister is Sudeshna. So Sudeshna is the wife of King of Virat. Okay. Now she is also the mother of Uttara, who was then married to Abhimanyu. So if Sutas were so oppressed, or as the narrative is created, why will the Pandavas, the pure-blooded Kshatriyas, marry their son to a Suta's daughter? Even if she was, her father was a Kshatriya, so what? Yeah. So clearly that is not there. Second, Kichak being a warrior, clearly it was not as if Sutas were not taught to fight. Yeah. So this narrative that all Sutas were oppressed is not correct. But still it is possible Karna was oppressed. So let's see what happens to him. It is very clearly mentioned in Adi Parva that Dronacharya was the guru of Karna. Very clearly mentioned that when Dronacharya came to teach Kauravas and Pandavas, many other people also came to study with him, of whom Karna was one. Yeah. So Adhirath sends him. Adhirath is a very good friend of Dhritarashtra. So Karna is studying there. Again, what we see in the teleseries and lot of write-ups is that Dronacharya says, no, I can't teach you. Yeah. So that is not true. He actually is a student of Dronacharya. And in the Adi Parva itself, he says that he would always be very jealous of Arjun. And Arjun wouldn't care. Arjun was younger. He was very busy with his own practice. But this guy always wanted to compete. Spardha manastu parthena saha. He would always want to compete with Arjun. At some point, he wanted to defeat Arjun so badly as a student that he goes to Dronacharya and says, I want to learn the Brahmastra. You teach me the Brahmastra. Now, Dronacharya has not taught the Brahmastra to anybody. Even to Ashwatthama, he taught only half, or rather, Ashwatthama had learned only half of it. So Dronacharya says, no, I can't teach you the Brahmastra. So Karna says, okay, fine. Then I will go and find some other guru. Dronacharya says, fine, go ahead. And then he goes to Parshuram. So that's how it is, yeah. So I've just given these 2 examples. In the book, you will find a lot more. Yes. But essentially, this whole victimhood narrative against Karna is demolished by these 2 things, yeah. Eventually, and why this is important, again, as we were discussing. As I said, we sometimes think that life is very unfair, poor Karna, hence we feel like we have to do justice to him. But no, that's not true. What Karna was dealt with in life was his own doing. If you see in Mahabharata, in Vyasji, what he has written, the character of Karna, he's extremely foul-mouthed. He's always bragging, always, yeah, about his own strength. Not once he has defeated Arjun. So there is this thing that, he was much better than Arjun. But no, whenever they came face to face, now not to say that he was not a good warrior, he was an excellent warrior. But whenever he came face to face with Arjun, he has always lost for whatever reason, yeah. Then let's talk about his loyalty towards Duryodhan. Again, there we will see that whenever it came for him to choose between his friend and his own ego, he chose his own ego all the time, consistently. Yeah. So his character is also very consistent, just that it's not the victim character that we see. Yeah. So what he got in his life was his own doing. He was extremely jealous. That was like the pivot of his life, that he wanted to defeat Arjun, and he cared for nothing else. For that one thing, he kept provoking Duryodhan to make this war happen. And eventually 40 lakh plus people were killed in the war.
Oh my God, you know so much. How many hours of reading have you done on Mahabharata? I think thousands of hours,
Right.
Yes, you know so much about Mahabharata. It's such a delight to hear you. So what are the, one thing, because you are such an expert now on Mahabharata, is there anything that you would really want that it could have been changed in the narrative of Mahabharata with your knowledge?
No, I wouldn't, because I think it is important for us to know how it happened. Yeah. And I find every character very, very fascinating. Their motivations, the way they decide, the way they are approaching life, the way they see life. And one of the most fascinating characters Of course, Krishna is one, but we'll not talk about him. He's Yogeshwar, so we keep him aside. But the other very fascinating character is Yudhishthir, which we think of as, guy who's just gambling away, who's very weak, he doesn't want to fight. That's what we typically see. But no, he's not that. The way he sees life, he also accepts whenever he makes mistakes. But he has infinite patience, and not patience so to say कि अरे चलो कुछ भी हो गया ठीक है. No, he is all for justice. Yeah, but his approach to situation is always that don't ever react out of impulse. Once he does during that gambling and he knows what the result is, he always says that let's ensure we are well prepared before we make a strike. Yeah. So even during the Vanvas, Bhim was always telling him that, oh, let's fight. Why are we sitting here? Vagere, vagere. And Yudhishthir tells him very, very practically. He says, you think you will go and fight him. But remember this, when the war eventually happens, all these people who are going to fight on his side. He is much more stronger. He has all the allies that he's made when we are in the jungle, plus the Rajasuya Yagna had happened before that. So in the Rajasuya Yagna, the Pandavas had gone and defeated many kings. So they were also not going to be on their side. Yeah. So he says, don't just go to fight because you want to fight. You cannot fight for losing. You have to fight to win. It has to be a winning approach. Yeah. But for that, we need to be well prepared. Hence, instead of going and fighting, let us prepare ourselves. And that is why he is the one who suggests that Arjun should go and get the celestial weapons. And they should have their allies together and all of it. And when it comes to taking decisions, he's very firm. He's very, very pragmatic. That's why he decides that Draupadi will be the wife of everybody. Because all Pandavas are mad about her when they see her. Yeah. Indriya Gramam Sampramatya is the word used. That they are also agitated looking at her. And Draupadi also is fine. She's looking at everybody and she doesn't mind. And he realizes that if I or Arjun, if one of us marries her, and being the elder brother, he had the right to marry her first. He realizes that we five will definitely, break. Our unity will break if that happens. So he's very, very pragmatic in life. And one needs to have that approach if one is going to be in the leadership position. So that was another very fascinating thing for me to read and understand from it. So I wouldn't change anything. I think what Vyasji has done is as good as it can get.
Fantastic. I think your management background and combining the knowledge of Mahabharata has really worked, and it's become very practical for us. But yes, you would not like to change any of the narrative, I understand. If tomorrow you come across, suppose if we take a situation, any question that you would like to ask one of the main characters of Mahabharata? Because anything that you would have asked perhaps Kunti or perhaps Arjuna, any one favorite character of yours you would like to ask a question today? Something which really intrigued you while you were reading, doing so much of in-depth study on this.
I think the one person I want to ask question, because I think most others I understand. I understand Bhishma also, his motivations, why he acted in a certain way. But one question I would ask him, that when Draupadi's Vastraharan was going on, he was technically right in saying, so when Draupadi keeps asking him, Jitam vapi ajitam va, have I been lost or not? You tell me. You tell me what is the right thing to do. What is dharma? Whether I have been lost or not. Yeah. And Vidur takes a stand. Vikarna takes a stand. And very simply, Bhishma says that, oh, the dharmasya paramagati. That dharma is very sukshma. It's very nuanced. So I can't really say anything right now. Although he says that, yeah, I do see that this is going to, devastate the Kaurav family. He says that, but he says it's very sukshma, it's very nuanced, hence I can't take a call. Now he is right technically. He's technically right. But sometimes one needs to know whether one should get into technicalities or take an ethical stand. Yeah. Sometimes when it comes to that, and he being a patriarch, he is the grandfather of all these people, right? He is not just an employee of the Hastinapur kingdom. Drona not taking a stand, I understand. Yeah, Kripacharya not taking a stand, I understand. But he is family, and he's seeing this happen in his family. So him, I would want to ask that in this situation, what technicality is more important, And he is right technically, according to technicalities. Again, I'm saying that, yeah, because irrespective of so the question that Draupadi has, right, that can Yudhishthir stake me or not, because he's already lost himself. He gives a very interesting answer. He says, ideally, a person who has lost himself cannot stake anybody else, for sure. But this relationship is very interesting. The husband and wife relation. Are we saying that if the husband has lost himself, does the relationship break away? Is he no longer your husband? Yeah, that's what it would mean if he says that he cannot stake you. Yeah. So it is not about the staking, it is about the sanctity of the relation. The other thing is, even if Yudhishthir would not have staked Draupadi, let's say, wouldn't she still become a slave because her husband has become a slave? I think that would just go with that, right? So he is right technically. But when you are in the situation where a person is being humiliated like this, can you still not take a stand and say, just stop this? This cannot go on, as Vidur does, and as even Vikarna does. So to him, I would like to ask that what was going through your mind? You could have taken that stand, why didn't you? So that I would definitely ask.
Very well answered. And I'm sure, I should ask a lot of people here about their favorite character and maybe, what question they would have asked. I think that'll make a very interesting read, I'm sure. Your book definitely stands out in the plethora of writings that we see on Mahabharata. And definitely it's a very, very good read. So, I mean, I know my time is running out because I have a lot of very interesting people waiting in the interactive round to ask you questions directly. But tell me, I mean, this was your first book and it is doing so well. So, what are your future plans? What are you planning to, and maybe some last thoughts on your book you'd like to share with our viewers? And then I go on to my interactive round.
Neetaji, in my life, a lot of things have just happened. So I just keep this in mind that, as Krishna tells Arjun that Nimitta Matra Bhava Sabyasachi. So as Krishna leads, things will turn out. I'm not a big planner or anything, but let's hope he keeps me on this journey. And as you said, I could write something on Mahabharata as well. There's more to write on Ramayana as well, and there's more to write on Mahabharata. Our Sahitya, our Shastras are so rich, and we can mine it to make our lives more fulfilling and enriching. So let's hope that happens. And on the book, I think, no, thank you so much for having me and discussing this book. This keeps me going.
It is definitely a pleasure. And any last thoughts on the book that you'd like to share with everybody before, as I mentioned, go on to the interactive? Anything that we have missed out you'd like to let people know about it?
I would just say that please read the book. And what would be most satisfying to me is if you read the book and you feel like, "Arey nahi, Mahabharat padhna hai," and it motivates you to read the original Mahabharat. Nothing like it.
Yeah, this is the book that we've been discussing. I like to invite Priya. She's a women entrepreneur. In fact, she was Kunti in one of the plays that we did on Mahabharata, part of a theatre society. So Priya Vashisht is going to be there.
Hi, Abby. This has been a very interesting conversation. I'm really enjoying it. So, just coming directly to my question is that, Ami, when Satyavati realized that both Chitrangada and Vichitravirya had died without leaving any issue, she asks Bhisham to marry her daughter-in-laws, Ambika and Ambalika. But Bhisham, since he was bound by his own oath, is unable to do so. Then she tells Bhisham that she has another son, Ved Vyas, from Rishi Parashar, and which happened before her marriage to Shantanu. And could she call him to impregnate her daughter-in-laws to get an heir for Hastinapur throne? If Satyavati could acknowledge her illegitimate son, why couldn't Kunti do so?
It's a beautiful question, and this question does come up. In fact, Yudhishthir asks this question to Kunti, that why did you never tell us? Why did you never tell us you had a son? So Kunti says that when I saw him, when he came, the first time I saw him when he came to the pavilion to challenge Arjun, I was already flabbergasted that he's challenging his own brother. After that, Suryadev, so his own father, biological father, had gone and told him that you guys are his brother, or rather, he's my son. And I spoke to him when eventually she did. So, but he had become so bitter against all of you already. The acrimony in him was so high that I had to take a call, and I said, fine, I'll give up on him. That is what she says. Yeah. So when it came to so if we see Satyavati's situation, yeah, so that was an exceptional situation that she was put in. That's when she recognizes, that's when she identifies her son, not just randomly. Yeah, that is an exceptional situation considering the future of Hastinapur Empire itself. This exceptional situation comes in Kunti's life only during the time of the war. Till then, there is no motivation for her to really to go and tell Karna, because it was still a very how do I say it? It was still a very weird situation for her to admit that this person who is Radheya and also well-to-do, if we remove the caste angle and everything, he has been well taken care of, right? So it was not, there was no need, there was no urging need to come out and create a scandal when none existed. But the need came when eventually the war was going to happen. That time the need definitely came, and she did go and say. Now it's interesting. In spite of her acknowledging or not acknowledging, a lot of people knew. Krishna knew, Bhishma knew. They all knew that he was her son. So the reason she gives is what I just mentioned, that when Yudhishthira asked her, why didn't you tell us? And she says that he had become so bitter against you guys that I didn't see a point in accepting him. I had to give him up. So it's a choice a mother makes. It's a very, very tough choice. In fact, she never forgets Karna. After 15 years of the war, she leaves the palace and she goes and lives in the forest with Dhritarashtra and Gandhari, serving them like a daughter-in-law would. At that time also, she reminds Yudhishthira that definitely do Shraddh, whatever rituals we do for everybody, do it for your elder brother as well. I don't know how I'm still alive seeing him dead. My heart must be made of Vajra, that it hasn't broken apart. Yeah? So she says that. So I think it's always there in her. She has never forgotten Karna. That possibly that guilt is also there in her. But the situation turned out in such a way that when she did acknowledge, it was already late, and Karna was already in a mode where he hated the Pandavas, especially Dhritarashtra. One point I'd like to say, if she had openly admitted, nobody would have said anything. Yeah, I don't think the society would have said anything.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a lot could have been averted if she had acknowledged right in the beginning. I think the war wouldn't have happened even, if she,
I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, the way you see Karna's character, right? Eventually.
Yes.
Even as a student, he hated Arjun so much that I think that thing just wouldn't have gone away. Possibly even before the whole Indraprasth thing happened and all that, right in the very beginning, if she had accepted, possibly it would have been averted. But
yes, No, I'm just saying if he had known about his parentage, probably, that bitterness with Arjun wouldn't have even started. So, yeah.
No, the bitterness had started long back. She didn't even know. Initially, she knew that he is somewhere in Champa, in Angadesh. But after that, the first time she sees him is in that pavilion. When Karna comes back after being trained by Parshuram. Yeah. So at that time, Karna has already started hating Karna. He went to Parshuram because he wanted to defeat Arjun. Yeah.
Right.
So that was already there. But possibly it could have been still averted. But that's the thing, right? The choices we make in life.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, totally get your point. Yeah, because Bhisham had accepted Ved Vyas. So he would have accepted Karna as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. Now we have Diya Aneja. She has a question to ask you directly. Thank you, Priya, for your question. Yes.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Diya.
Hi. So I've actually been wanting to read the Mahabharata and finally know the story, but I couldn't bring myself to actually doing that. So a book now seems like the perfect way to know this story. So I will definitely be reading it. So my questions were that, according to you, when did Mahabharata actually happen? And how many questions do you think are still unanswered till date? And do you think we'll be getting them all? And who would you say is your favorite character in Mahabharata and why?
Okay, so when did Mahabharata happen? I am not an expert on that topic. Lot of work is happening, yeah, because if we take even the Bhandarkar Oriental Critical edition of Mahabharata, there are certain configurations, some nakshatra configurations in the sky, which people have, put it in a software and they've tried to figure out what the date is. And there is a whole range of dates starting from some 3000 BCE to 5000 BCE. So that work is going on. I'm not an expert, hence I would not take any stand on that. I would say I can't put my foot down and say this is this or the other. But definitely it is at least 3000 to 4000 years old, at least, yeah. The event happening, the narration might have happened later. How many questions are unanswered? You mean in Mahabharata unraveled? I think there is, Mahabharata, everybody who reads it will have their own questions. So in a way, I was trying to answer questions which I had, or rather I started reading with the questions I had, and then some questions which I got to hear from people around me. So I'm sure as you read the Mahabharata, there will be even more questions. And maybe you'll find your own answers as well. And the last point on favorite character, before 3 years, 3 years ago, if you'd asked me this question, I would have said Arjun or something like that. But after this, I think every character is so nuanced and so interesting that I actually don't have a favorite character. Krishna is extremely interesting. Draupadi is fantastic. Kunti is extremely, extremely fascinating. So this lady, this one thing she does in her life, she does not acknowledge Karna is one thing. But apart from that, the way she has lived her life, there has never been a time when there have not been hurdles in her life. Yeah? She's always faced challenges. There might be phases where it might be good for her, but then again, it would go down the drain. She spent most of her life in forest, her young life in forest. And then afterwards, without her sons, seeing her sons getting humiliated and all that. But the strength of character of this lady is unimaginable. So even her character is very strong. Vidur, of course. Vidur is another beautiful character in Mahabharata. Completely worth getting deep into and studying. So lots of them.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Asha Dhaima. She's an educator and she'd like to ask a question directly. Yes, Asha.
Good evening, Nita. Good evening, Ami. And I'm so delighted that we'll have a version of Mahabharata coming from a scholar of Sanskrit. Otherwise, we have such descriptive books coming from people who rely on translated texts. So authenticity goes off. So thank you for bringing this.
Oh, I should clarify, I'm not an expert or anything. I'm also a student. And I refer translations as well. But yeah, I
but you know Sanskrit. The way you were reciting those shlokas and all, you have a command on Sanskrit. Yeah. So my question here is, from a layman's perspective, when a person sees the entire story, and they usually find one person to blame for this so destructive war, and one person that usually is picked up for that person, where the buck stops, is Draupadi.
Yes.
Right. So I don't understand. There was so much. Dhritarashtra, Duryodhana, Bhishma, Pitamaha. Everyone was responsible. So why is she blamed for all this destruction? And was it such an anti-feminist society, gender prejudices? What was it? Because those were the times, those were magnificent times, rishis and scholars and all. And they're also framing the story in a way that they are putting the blame on this poor lady who was such an example for present day modern women. Yeah, please.
So Asha ji, you see the discomfort you are going with, because on one end, we think these rishis were so great. But then why are they putting a blame on a lady, whereas she really doesn't seem to have done much? It is others who are more involved. So the fact is, they don't put the blame on her. The blame on her is being put by people who retell stories. In Vyasa's Mahabharata, the character of Draupadi is beautiful beyond measure. And I'll give you just one example. So, you know why people put that blame? Because she said, Andhega Putra Andha. That is what we are told. Yeah. In Mahabharata, Draupadi doesn't say Anteka Putra Andha. She is not a lady who will even say things like this. In fact, she is not even there. when this has happened. Yeah. So the blaming has not been done by our rishis. The blaming, in fact, our rishis were very, very open-minded. Just now we were discussing Ved Vyas, yeah? Even Karna for that matter. They didn't even mind that there was a son before who they called to do Niyog as well. Yeah? So it was actually a pretty open-minded society in certain ways. So they are not putting the blame on Draupadi at all. In fact, the character of Draupadi is told to us in this way that eventually when Krishna dies in Dwarka, 36 years after the war, Arjun, Krishna had asked his Sarathi, Daruk, to get Arjun so that he can take away the women. Dwarka was going, it seemed like Dwarka was going to be destroyed. So but before Arjun comes, Krishna is already dead. So when Arjun comes, he meets Vasudev, Krishna's father. And he says this one line. He says, now with Krishna dead, I think it's time for us also to leave the palace, to leave the kingdom. He says, we 5 Pandavas, Krishna and Krishna, which is Draupadi, we are one Atma in multiple bodies. That is the stature of Draupadi. That they consider, they all were married. They had other wives as well. Yeah, all of them had all other wives. But in spite of all that, they are saying, Krishna, we 5 Pandavas and Draupadi are like one Atma in different bodies. That is the beauty, that is the character, that is the stature Draupadi has been given. Yeah, and she is not blamed. People make this thing that, oh, she was Agni Putri, so she's always angry, always wanting revenge. No, she's not. Of course, she's angry for what has happened to her. Of course, she's angry that her husbands have been humiliated this way, which they didn't deserve. Yeah, but she's not always seeking revenge. In fact, this whole thing as well, where they say that Draupadi said that I will tie my hair only after washing it with Dushasan's blood. Even that is not there in Mahabharata. Bhishma says, I will drink Dushasan's blood. Draupadi doesn't make any such demand. It comes from plays written after that, which then got dramatized and things like that. Actually, for such discomfort, which even I felt when I was, when I hadn't read the Mahabharata, this book eventually happened to answer these questions. And then when you read it, you're like, oh, wow, yeah, this is nothing to do with feminism, this, that, anything. Because they don't blame her at all. It's the later day playwrights who have done that.
Thank you, Harsha. Wonderful question and equally wonderfully answered by Ami. Now we have Mr. Vijay Shankar. He wanted to ask you a question. Yes, Vijay.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, very well.
Yes. Many congratulations on your book. I'm really spellbound. Words fail me. And now the question comes.
Yes.
Actually, my question is in 2 parts. It is a single question, but it is in 2 parts. The way the Pandavas created Indraprastha out of Khandavprastha, when they got Khandavprastha, and later on they went ahead with their Rajasuya Yagya, and Yudhishthir was proclaimed as Samrat. Then don't you think that at the later stage, when Lord Krishna went with the offer of 5 villages, when we finally gave the offer of 5 villages as a peace deal, Duryodhan rejecting the same and denying even 5 villages to the Pandavas was a very fine statesmanly move.
Mm-hmm. In what way?
In a way that he knew, in a way that what he could perceive, like what he could anticipate as a statesman, as a crown prince, that with those 5 villages they would create a kingdom, and then they again could go with their Rajasuya. So denying them even that a point of land, the point of needle, was basically denying them any future kingdom at all, any prospect of owning a kingdom at all. Okay. Don't you think it was a very good statesmanly move?
Vijay Shankarji, very nice. It was very statesmanly from that point of view. What was the consequence? Who got the eventual kingdom? Forget Indraprastha, Purna Hastinapur, who got it?
See, I'm a lawyer, so I will take it the other way. I had also pondered over it, but I would take it the other way, that he was a statesman. At least he didn't live to see them ruling.
So that
Because
is the
Vijay
choice
again
he
is-
made, and you are right. So he's actually not even thinking from a political point of view. He's actually stating why he said that. He's very clear. He says, I cannot coexist with the Pandavas. He is not even trying to play a game or anything. No, no. Sidar Satak, I cannot coexist with the Pandavas. That is his point of view. And Karna supports him. Karna also wants that. Yeah. So you can say that it was very statesmanly because yes, possibly the Pandavas could have, again through their enterprise created a kingdom and all that. Very much possible. Yeah. But why did Duryodhan not give? In per his own submission, he did not want to coexist with the Pandavas. And he did not even make any, he did not even mince words to say that. That is why when Krishna comes, they try to capture him. Now, how statesmanly was that? Yeah. A statesman should be able to see the consequence of his action. A statesman should be able to see the consequence of his action on state, not just himself. That is the difference between dharma and adharma. Right? So was Duryodhan being very smart and looking out for himself? Of course. But for that himself, he led to the destruction of 40 lakhs plus people. Now, is it statesmanly from a sustainability perspective, from a dharmic perspective? I would think no.
Thank you so
That's
much.
right.
Thank you so much. Many, many congratulations once again. And I'm looking forward to read your book. Thank you so much.
Okay. One last question I have from Mr. Abhishek Anand. He's unable to switch on his video, so I'll read out the question that he's sent me. Namaste, Amiji. I'm halfway through your book and it has totally been enlightening so far. However, I have not been able to wrap my head around that chapter on Draupadi. Despite being so superbly dedicated to her duties as she was, why couldn't she follow Yudhishthira to heaven? That she loved Arjuna a little more than others hardly seems a convincing reason. It is not as if Yudhishthira was never at fault, right? So why was one of her 5 satis not allowed into heaven?
Okay.
This is a question from Mr. Abhishek.
Okay, Abhishek ji, thank you so much. You raise an interesting question. I will give an answer which you haven't asked, the question you haven't asked, but I'll still answer that question. You've asked it from a Draupadi's perspective. The point is that they all eventually go to heaven and they all eventually go to hell. Yeah, they state this because not just Draupadi, none of them except Duryodhan really make it there, and they have this whole dog incident and all that. But that apart, we are told eventually that all Pandavas, including Draupadi, go to hell and then they go to heaven. Yeah. And Duryodhan, Karna, vagere, they are all also in heaven. So that is even more कि अरे भाई द्रौपदी को तो गिरा दिया ठीक है, but दुर्योधन उन लोग को heaven क्यों भेज दिया? Right? So the reason for this, as I understand, and it's the same reason which is given in Mahabharata as well, and it is given in a lot of our Dharma Shastras. This heaven and hell, the concept of heaven and hell. So the dictum is that a king has to give justice. Yeah. So if a criminal has been brought to him and that person has genuinely committed a crime after all due process and due diligence, we know that this person is guilty, then it is the king's responsibility to punish that person. Okay. Now, king can decide what that punishment is. If the king gives appropriate punishment, the person who was guilty is cleansed of that crime that he had done. So that the karma and karma phala have been given to him through the agency of the king. Yeah. Now at that point, if the king decides, when the matter is brought to the king and the king decides that I will let him go because he's my son, he's my whatever, I like him, I will let him go. Even then, king being the agency of Yama can take that call. So the person who's criminal will have his karma balanced, cleansed off. But the papa, because the guilt, the crime has happened, yeah, that has happened. So the papa of that crime then goes on king. So the king has to bear that papa. Okay. So what is the significance of telling us that Duryodhan, this, that they all went to heaven? It's very simple. They committed crimes. Yeah, they were adharmic. But through this war, the way their deaths were done by the Raja, who's Yudhishthir at that point, that thing was balanced off. They got the punishment of their deed, and hence they could go to heaven. Whereas other Pandavas, Draupadi, all of them, they had some or the other thing yet to be done, because we all, none of us are 100% virtuous. Kuch na kuch reh jata hai. To sort of balance that out, they had to go to hell first and then to heaven. So this is the overall narrative. As far as Draupadi, Arjun, wo sab mein to everybody has some or the other thing. Na? Even, as I said, Yudhishthir also, while they show him entering heaven with the dog, eventually he's also sent to hell. So it's just one of the ways of saying things, that everybody has some or the other problem in them. And for Yudhishthir, as I said, Yudhishthir, we think of him as not being perfect. I think there are 3 people in Mahabharata who can come as close to perfection in terms of understanding dharma. One is, of course, Krishna. Second is Vidur. And third is actually Yudhishthir. And I would urge everybody to read the chapter on dharma meets strength, in which I talk about Yudhishthir and Bhim. So hopefully it will clarify some of these points as well. I hope, Abhishek, that sort of helps think about this more.
It definitely does. And thank you, Ami, for being on our platform. It has been such a pleasure. It was indeed so enlightening. Your book definitely debunks all the myths, quashes a lot of popular notions, and offers insights into aspects not commonly known on Mahabharata. Thank you. And I must recommend everyone once again to buy it. It's been a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bahut, bahut aabhar. Thank you, everybody.